All right, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fiscal year 2024 Individual Artist Projects Grant webinar. My name is Hillary Amna, and I use she, they pronouns, and I'm the Grants Program Lead for Civic Arts at the City of Berkeley. And before we begin, the City of Berkeley recognizes that the community we live in was built on the territory of the Huechune, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the ancestors and descendants of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to all of the Ohlone tribes and descendants of the Verona Band. As we begin our webinar tonight, we acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of Berkeley, the documented 5,000-year history of a vibrant community at the West Berkeley Shell Mound, and the Ohlone people who continue to reside in the East Bay. We recognize that Berkeley's residents have and continue to benefit from the use and occupation of this unceded stolen land since the City of Berkeley's incorporation in 1878. As stewards of the laws regulating the City of Berkeley, it is not only vital that we recognize the history of this land, but also recognize that the Ohlone people are present members of Berkeley and the other East Bay communities today. The City of Berkeley will continue to build relationships with the Lejeune tribe and to create meaningful actions that uphold the intention of this land acknowledgement. So first, I'll quickly take us through today's agenda. First, we'll give a civic arts overview, talk about some important dates regarding the grant cycle. We'll give some grant program details, including eligibility and program requirements. Go through the application process and talk about parts of the application, as well as go through a quick submittable tutorial. We'll talk about the review process, including review criteria and scoring scale that grant review panelists will use. Go over grant writing tips, methods of technical assistance, and then we'll end with questions. And to ask questions, you can use the Q&A icon to type in your questions, and I will answer those at the end of the presentation. And I really encourage you to only ask general questions. If you have specific questions about a project you're thinking about, or something directly related to what you're thinking as far as your the application you want to personally submit, I would recommend using some other technical assistance methods, or you can schedule an appointment with me and I'll talk about those a little bit later. But definitely enter your general questions that are not specific to your own project in the chat, and I'll answer them at the end of this presentation. All right, to give a civic arts overview, our mission is to support a culturally vibrant and diverse arts ecosystem within the City of Berkeley in three primary ways. And funding artists, arts organizations, and festivals through our grants program is one of those ways that we fulfill our mission. The other ways are providing public art opportunities, and then also ensuring access to arts and culture for Berkeley residents and visitors. On the right side of this slide, you'll see our cultural equity statement, but I wanted to highlight some concrete ways our grants program is committed to making the program equitable. So the first is we've increased our cultural equity review criterion percentage from previous grant applications. And then we've also refined that cultural equity review criterion language. We're now offering translation services for the guidelines and application questions, but this is available upon request. We had the guidelines reviewed by the city's disability services program to make sure that that the program was accessible, as well as the written guidelines. We've recruited a much larger review panelist pool this year and plan to prioritize Black, Indigenous, and people of color as grant review panelists. And then we will continue targeted outreach to make sure that our grant programs are made available and known to individuals and communities that haven't interacted with our agency in the past. So some important dates to keep in mind. The grant application is now open, and the deadline to apply is March 1st at 11:59 p.m. And even though the deadline is at 11:59 p.m., please keep in mind that staff will not be available for any technical assistance after 4:30. So just keep that in mind if you plan on submitting after 4:30 on the day of the deadline. So throughout March and April, panelists will review and score the applications. And then we will schedule a grant panel review meeting, and applicants will be notified about the day or days of the public grant panel review meeting, so you can attend if you'd like. On June 5th, we'll convene the grant subcommittee to talk about funding scenarios for all of our grant programs, and then those scenarios will be forwarded to our Civic Arts Commission at the meeting happening on June 21st. And this is where grant awards will be approved. And all of those approvals are contingent on us getting funding from the City Council. And we will know that after June 28th, during the City Council meeting where they approve the fiscal year 24 budget. And then in July, hopefully early July, all of the applicants will be notified about the acceptance or decline of their applications. So a grant program overview. This is a $4,000 award to create new work. And so this is not to stage old work or fund works in progress or projects that are nearly complete, or as a way to distribute a completed project. So this is really for new work. And the $4,000 is largely unrestricted. So it can be used for any of these things listed on the screen. But I really highly recommend making sure you read the guidelines to see what funding restrictions we have for this award. Okay, so eligibility. The first point of eligibility is that you must be a resident of Berkeley, and you'll need to provide proof of this in your application. And proof of this can look like a utility bill with your name and address on it, or a copy of your rental agreement or your lease agreement that is covering the application deadline date. There are other ways to prove this, but those are two common ways to prove your residency. Next, you'll need to apply as an individual. So teams or collectives or partnerships are not eligible for this grant. You also can't be a grantee from the past 2 grant cycles. So if you've received an individual artist project award in the last grant cycle or the one before, which is FY22 and FY23, you're not eligible to apply this year. You must also be 18 years or older, and you can be an artist in any artistic discipline. You cannot be a full-time student or a city employee during any portion of the grant activity period as a major eligibility point, and you must be in good standing with Civic Arts. And what that basically means for this grant program is that you don't have any outstanding final reports due to us. All right, so some program requirements. Again, this is for new original work, and the project must include a public presentation that incorporates meaningful community engagement. And both the work on the project and the public presentation must be in Berkeley. You also must complete the project and the presentation between July 1st, 2023 and June 30th, 2024. This is the grant activity period. And then a final report will be due that describes how the project went. It is due July 30th, 2024, and this is 30 days after the grant activity period. So that is a change from previous grant cycles. So please keep in mind that the final report is due 30 days after the grant cycle ends. I also want to note that if you are awarded this grant, you will be required to participate in an artist showcase to talk about your project. And we should have a video example of that, of last year's virtual artist showcase that we can share soon. And again, that was virtual. We're not sure if it will be virtual or in person this year, but you can hopefully access a video of what we did last year to see what that looks like. Okay, so the application includes some questions that require you to enter text and some that require you to upload files. So you'll need to upload your proof of residency, your resume, and your work samples. And then the narrative questions will require that you enter text. Please note that we only accept electronic applications. We're not accepting any paper applications at this time. And we use the submittable grants management system to collect those applications. Oh, I'm sorry. Oops, apologies. I also want to reiterate that the deadline is at March 1st, 2023 at 11:59 p.m. and staff will not be available after 4:30 p.m. So I really recommend applying early in case you run into any technical issues, and just reminding you that technical assistance is available throughout the application period. I think I skipped a little bit. So this is, again, what I talked about, the application elements. I apologize for that. Again, you'll upload your proof of residency, resume, and your work samples, and then you'll enter text for the narrative questions. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, submittable is how we collect our applications, and you can create a free account if you haven't already. Although technical assistance is available for answering questions about eligibility or review criteria, for customer support or technical assistance for your submittable account, you'll need to contact Submittable's customer support. And that is because I am unable to look at certain parts of your account or largely do any kind of troubleshooting on my end with Submittable. So we'll go ahead and look at Submittable. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. All right, so this is the landing page where if you don't have a submittable account, you can sign up here. Otherwise, you will sign in using your email and password on this landing page. And this is what this is our landing page as well, for all of the open calls that we have and grant applications offered through Civic Arts right now. So once you log in, or you can access the guidelines here. And all of the guidelines for this grant program are included here, but you can also access a printable PDF where it's formatted a little bit in a way that might be easier to read, or if you're using a screen reader, this is formatted for that use. But all of the information is the same. So once you thoroughly review all of the guidelines, you'll scroll down to the very bottom. In the first part, first you'll click submit. And then you'll scroll to the very bottom after you thoroughly review the guidelines. And I'm not sure where my, you will first do a eligibility check, and that's at the very bottom once you hit submit. And I apologize for not having that up, but you'll first answer a few questions, and that is an eligibility check. And if you are eligible based on your answers for those questions, it will take you to the application. And when you log in, this is what your dashboard will look like. As you can see, I've got 3 grant applications here, and I'm looking at the tab at all submissions. But to look at the actual application, this is what that will look like. So you'll see this, and you'll enter all of these fields. As you can see, most fields are required, and they have a little red asterisk if they are required. This is an example of a question where you will upload a file, and this is where you will upload your proof of residency. There are several questions that have additional instructions below the question, so please make sure to note those when they exist. So there are some other types of questions, like a drop-down menu, but mostly you're either uploading files for your application questions or entering text. And the questions or file uploads that are associated with each of the review criteria, which I'll talk a little bit about later, you'll see that they're directly under those review criteria that they correspond to. So this is what the application looks like. And again, you can access that today. You could ask, the applications are live, and that is the totality of that application. So on to review process. Once the deadline passes, staff will review all applications for eligibility and then assign those eligible applications to the grant review panelists. And the panelists will have several weeks to review the applications, and they'll use the review criteria and scoring scale. And then we will meet virtually over Zoom to discuss each application. And all applicants will be notified about the status of their applications. And then again, I will also notify you about the date and time of the public grant review panel, so in case you want to attend via Zoom. Then once the review panel concludes, staff will review the scores and come up with funding scenarios. And we generally have enough funds to fund 10 artists. So we have 10 awards that we are planning for this upcoming grant cycle. And the funding scenarios that I mentioned will be discussed by the grant subcommittee, and then we'll take those final recommendations to the Civic Arts Commission for approval. And all Civic Arts Commission meetings are open to the public, and applicants will also be notified about the time and date of that meeting where awards will be approved. And that date and time is already set. And I will just note that that will likely be an in-person meeting, as we are moving from virtual commission meetings to in-person. And then once the commission approves all the awards, you will be notified about the acceptance or decline of your application. Okay, so this is a lot of text. These are the review criteria, and these are the criteria by which panelists will evaluate your applications. And these are included in the grant guidelines, and I highly recommend reviewing them thoroughly. This is how your application will be evaluated. Each of the review criteria are weighted. So you will see that the scores panelists give to these areas will be worth more or less based on their percentage. So we have artistic practice and experience, project narrative, and cultural equity, all worth 30% of your total score. And then community impact, that area will be worth 10% of your score. And this is the scoring scale that panelists will use in conjunction with the review criteria. They will assign a numerical value to each review criteria using this rubric. And with the weighted scores, the final scores will be averaged between all the panelists who reviewed your application. So each panelist will assign a number to the review criteria, and then that individual panelist will have a final score, and then the scores of all panelists that they have entered will be averaged, and that will be your application's final score. All right, so some grant writing tips. I can't emphasize enough that specificity is key. Do not assume that panelists know your work or even know your artistic discipline or any venues you're thinking about using. And this goes along with that specificity bullet. Panelists are coming from all over the Bay Area and come from all different backgrounds, so please keep that in mind. They may not be familiar with your artistic discipline and might not know some of the language or jargon that you may use in your application. Start your application early. Again, you could start it today if you wanted to. The applications are open. Another tip is to have someone else review your application answers. I know that I always benefit from another proofreader for clarity and typos in my work. And hopefully there haven't been any typos in this slideshow. There are also description fields connected to the work sample file uploads. And I want to recommend that you use these to not only describe the work that you've uploaded, but also let panelists know where they should specifically look. So let's say you've uploaded a novel for your work sample. There's no way that a panelist would be able to read that entire novel for their panel service. So you could say something like, look at page 3, paragraph 2, and this is the portion that you'd like them to focus on, or listen to minutes 6 through 7 on this audio file that I've uploaded. So that's really going to help panelists because if you have large files like large video or audio files, it's very unlikely that they would be able to have time to review the entire thing. So directing them to where you would like them to focus will be helpful. And then lastly, do not wait until the last minute to submit your application. We cannot accommodate for any hardware, software, or internet issues you may be having on the day of the deadlines, and extensions will not be given. This is a 7.5-week application period, so please use this time and start and complete your application early. If you start early and run into issues, it's much more likely that I or submittable customer support can help you. All right, so technical assistance, there are several ways to access help with your application. But first, I recommend reading the guidelines. Please read the guidelines. You'll likely find the answers to your questions in those documents. Check out the frequently asked questions on our website. You can email me. This is my email address. Or you can schedule a virtual 15-minute appointment with me for an audio or video call using Zoom. And you can use this, or you can schedule a virtual appointment using a link on our website that will link to this image of the Calendly scheduler. And please note that although I can answer questions for you about the application, I cannot read or review your application for you. So I can answer questions, but I can't review your application before it's submitted. And we do not have sample applications available. If you need technical assistance specifically with your submittable account, again, you'll need to contact their customer support, and this is the link to their customer support. Right, well, this concludes the presentation portion of the webinar, and my contact information is on the left of the screen. I've included my office phone number, but this is really not the best method to contact me since I work remotely part of the week and do not have access to my phone when I'm working remotely. So really the best way is to email me or schedule that appointment to have to ask questions over Zoom. So again, all the technical assistance resources are available on our website, and that is a link to our website. And that's also where you can apply. There's links to the applications directly on our website. All right, so I'll go ahead and start reading and answering the question. So if you have a question, please enter it into the question and answer box. Go ahead and see. Okay, so the first question is, how many awards will there be? And we are planning on 10 awards. That is generally the amount of money we have budgeted for this grant category. All of that is dependent on how much money the council approves for our grants program and other factors. We've been able to fund more than 10 in some grant cycles. That's not always the case. The reason why there's been more than 10 in some previous grant cycles is because of finding funding from other areas, but really we are planning on 10 awards. Okay, next question. Are you also including the aged in your cultural equity criteria? And the answer for that is maybe. We don't necessarily ask about what kind of cultural equity we're looking for, but you'll need to talk about your connection to a historically marginalized community. I will say that we're mostly talking about racial equity when we talk about cultural equity. So you may be able to make a case about about age as cultural equity, but that's not necessarily how I think that the review criteria is interpreted. Next question. Oh, and I will also start my video. Does the individual grant affect eligibility for other grants and vice versa? And the answer for that is no, because none of the other grants are for individuals. So right now we have 3 core grant programs. This one is for individual artists. And the other 2 grants, you must be an organizational entity to apply. And as I mentioned earlier, you cannot be a partnership or collective or organization and apply for this grant. So it doesn't necessarily affect your eligibility for other grants. If you're trying to apply for, let's say, the general operating support grant, which is for organizations, as an individual, you would not be eligible for that grant. So in that way, I guess it would, but there's not really overlapping eligibility for the grants for this one and the other 2 festivals and general operating support. Okay, question is, suppose the project, quote, breaks at the presentation. Do I have to return the dough? And the answer is no. If it breaks during a presentation, as long as you are doing a presentation and you have completed the work, you do not have to return the money. However, if you do not complete the project that you have included in your application, you do have to return the funds. Okay, another question is, who decides what is or isn't art? Can it be politically themed? We don't really have anyone deciding on what is or isn't art, but I would definitely use the guidelines as what we're looking for in funding these awards. There's not necessarily any political restrictions on the projects you may be proposing. I will say that if anything is discriminatory in your project in any way, it will be ineligible immediately. So just keep that in mind. But your work can be politically themed as long as it's not discriminatory against anyone. Next question, will the various criteria and tips for grant writing be available after the meeting? Yes, the review criteria are available immediately. They're right now. All of the application materials, technical assistance methods, and grant guidelines are available right now on our website. And this meeting is recorded. And we will also have a recording of this webinar on our website as well. Next question is, if you are an unhoused artist in Berkeley, how should we provide proof of residency? I've lived in Berkeley for 5 years, and that's a great question. You can get a letter from an unhoused service provider to note that, and there are some other ways that you can create a proof of residency in Berkeley as an unhoused person. There's more information about that in the guidelines, and I'm happy to talk to anyone about methods for uploading that requirement individually, but just keep in mind that it is unhoused artists are eligible for this grant. The next question says, to verify for grants program, you must be a resident of Berkeley. And the answer is yes. Next question, does the performance of Western classical music fall out of the definition of new works? And the answer to that is no, you don't necessarily have to be creating your own composition if your artistic discipline is music. But let's say you've created a certain program that includes certain musical pieces and you've done it before and you're just going to do it again. That's not necessarily what we would consider a new work. But yes, you could play other folks' compositions or something you didn't write as your project. The next question is, where's the video presentation from last year's grantees? All 2 days can you? So the video presentation from the artist showcase from last year, it is the full version, which might be over 3 hours, is on our YouTube page, which if you Google Civic Arts in YouTube, you should be able to find it. But a shortened version that we're going to have that's going to be 2 to 3 minutes is not quite ready yet, but that's going to be available on our website. And again, if you have trouble navigating the city website, you can directly put in berkeleyca.gov/civic-arts, which is on the screen right now, and that will take you to all the resources for civic arts. I attended UC Berkeley and use it as my mailing address. Well, I'll just note that UC Berkeley or students are not eligible for this grant. Question, does cultural competency criteria change emphasis on different years? And the answer to that is no. We don't necessarily have any specific emphasis on our cultural equity review criteria. So we don't, that doesn't necessarily have a change. Will you have a webinar for the organizational support grant? And the answer is yes, that is next Wednesday at 11 a.m. And you can register it in the same way that you registered for this grant. Is this opportunity offered yearly? And right now the answer is yes, we have this grant open every year. And again, if you were awarded in the past 2 grant cycles, though, you will not be eligible for this to apply this time. So let's say that you do apply and get awarded this year, you would not be eligible for the next 2 years. When you are awarded a grant, can you keep the work you create, or must you give one or all the pieces to the Civic Arts Commission? That's a good question. We do not, you keep all of your work. We do not collect any of the pieces. We do want a record of what you did with the funds, and the way that we collect that is through the final report and also that artist showcase. So you'll talk about the project you created and any of your creative processes in that, but we don't collect any pieces other than what documentation of your work in the final report. Is it possible to get a paper copy of all the guidelines? And the answer is not from our office. You are more than welcome to print the guidelines, and there's definitely several ways to access the guidelines that are in a printer-friendly method. I do believe the public library has some options for printing, but we do not provide paper copies of the guidelines. Can you talk more about the presentation requirement for visual art? Does completed work have to be exhibited in Berkeley? And the answer to that is yes. If you plan on doing an exhibition as your presentation that has some kind of meaningful community engagement, and we're not prescriptive about what that meaningful community engagement is, you can describe that in what you want to do in your grant application. But if you are exhibiting, if that is the presentation of your work, it does need to be in Berkeley. The presentation needs to be in Berkeley. But you're not, if you are a visual artist, your final presentation that includes the meaningful community engagement doesn't necessarily have to be an exhibit. But if you are planning an exhibit as your presentation, it does need to be in Berkeley. This is a good question. What is the criteria to serve on the grant review panel? So there's not necessarily any review criteria other than you must be residing in the Greater Bay Area. We had a call for grant panelists that was open for a couple of months. And so there is a panelist pool of individuals. I think there are 40 some individuals that are in that pool, and they have been approved by our Civic Arts Commission. And so the panelists, I will select the panelists and curate who serves on the panelists based on our cultural equity commitments, and also based on the types of applications I may see. If I'm seeing a lot of applications come through that have to do with dance, I might be looking specifically for someone with experience in dance to serve on the grant panel. So the only requirement is that they have some kind of experience with arts and culture and reside in the Greater Bay Area. And then they will be selected out of that pool. Someone has a question about an organizational grant, but this is the Individual Artist Projects Grant. So I really recommend you attending the webinar next Wednesday to ask that question. Does the connection with community aspect of the art have to include connections with humans? Or could the connection to community that the art contains be with nature, animals, or something else? That is a good question. And yes, it does need to be with humans. If you applied last year, can you receive feedback on how to strengthen your application to be chosen? And the answer is yes. And I will mention that at the end of every application period and after the grant cycle and all the awards have been determined, there's always an opportunity to receive your panelist notes. And I can go over those panelist notes with you individually. And that is a really great way to improve your application in the future. That usually occurs right after the grant period. But if you did apply last year and did not receive your panelist notes, if you didn't request them, you can still do that, and we can schedule a time to go over those. If my resume has no recent work, history in many years and I don't have previous examples of work, I could automatically be deducted 30%. And the answer is yes. If you do not include work samples or and don't have previous examples of work, you would not score well in the areas that require those. And so you would be, it depends on how the panelists interpret that, but that would not be a high scoring application. All right. Will this webinar recording be made available? The answer is yes, it will be available on our website, where on the grants page specifically, where all the other grants resources will be housed. The call for the panel to select the grants has already taken place. Will you change the panel group for next year? And the answer to that is yes and no, because when you apply to be a panelist and are approved, you can serve in that panelist pool for 2 years. So the panelists who are currently in the pool will also be eligible to serve on the panel next year, but we will have another call for panelists to add more people to the pool next year. So it will be, we'll add more people, but there will still be the panelists that are eligible to serve from this grant cycle on the next cycle. Will Black applicants be prioritized as panelists? And the answer is yes, we will prioritize Black, Indigenous, and people of color to serve as panelists. All right. That looks like all of the answers. I'm sorry, all of the questions I'm seeing in the question and answer box. So thank you all for attending. Again, this recording will be available on our website. Please visit our website and all the resources and technical assistance methods available to you, and start your application early. Don't wait till the last minute. All right, thanks so much.